Inspiration for It Ain't So Beautiful, actually, there really was an incident a couple years ago. One of my family members was very sick, and I was told that they were dying. And I was really torn up and had gone somewhere to go shopping to get my mind off of it. And this little old lady came and sat next to me and started talking to me and said the most inspirational things. And so I left, I went home, and it really changed my life. And then I thought, was she really there? Like maybe she was just an angel who was just sent to tell me this one thing in this one moment. And so that's where I got the idea for The Forgotten, because that's what they do, is they find these people and they tell them this one thing that can change their life.
Okay. Sorry. So mine is so much less deep than that. Okay, so some of you who've come to my signings before have heard this story before, but my husband is he's really supportive. He's always throwing out really random story ideas, and I mean random. And the one that I talk about now, but it actually kind of showed up in Publishers Marketplace one day because somebody actually kind of wrote something like it. But we were sitting in the house one day, and he sits there and he says, "Okay, here's an idea. The kids go to summer camp, and all the camp counselors are zombies. Go." And I'm like, I'm not writing that. And so those are the kind of ideas he throws out at me. But we were driving down the road one day, and he actually said, what if there was a kid? And it's always a kid, because they're always 13-year-old boys, because in his head, I think he's still a 13-year-old boy. What if there was this kid who could find dead bodies? And I kind of mulled it over, and I'm like, okay, that is actually kind of brilliant. I like that idea. And so, but it's going to be a 16-year-old girl, and there's going to be a love interest and kissing and blah, blah, blah. But, so my inspiration is way less deep. Are you guys ready for questions and answers, or does anybody have anything else deep to add to make me sound even less deep?
Yeah, so we wanted this to be really interactive, and rather than reading, which when you have 6 people reading, you guys would be falling asleep. So we thought we'd just open it up for questions. You can ask one for all of us, or if you have a specific one for any of us, that's okay too. But you do have to raise your hand, and we'll call on you.
How about we give away a CD for the first 3 people who ask questions? Oh, Sarah wants one.
Okay. What book do you wish you guys wrote?
Oh.
Why am I holding the mic?
You get it. Okay, I'll give out this.
I just read Revolution by Jennifer Darling, and it's like this crazy. I could never in a million years write it because the characters are like insanely smart. And she goes to France, and it sort of ties in with the French Revolution, and it's like there's so much history and everything that ties together, and I was just blown away by the end of it. I was on Twitter like, okay, I'm just going to quit writing because I cannot do that. So I would take credit for that one if it was possible.
I did think of one.
Okay.
After I gave you the microphone.
Okay. Divergent by Veronica Roth. It just rocked. I loved it so much. I can't wait for the sequel.
And I just read White Cat by Holly Black, and then now I'm almost done with Red Glove, and the world building, her building of the curse workers world, and how flawed her main character is Castle Sharp, who's this really flawed character that you can't help but love. And I just think that writing a character who's so kind of basically bad, kind of, but making you like him is awesome.
I'm going to say Looking for Alaska, just because that was the book that really brought me into young adult. And, you know, I have to tell this little story. Those of you who are familiar with John Green and the videos he does and all of that with his brother, I went to this concert in Portland at this little venue. Like, it's not even a big, great thing. And I go into the women's stall, and there in the stall, DFTBA, which stands for Don't Forget to Be Awesome, which is sort of this nerd fighter thing, and I'm like, oh, the power of John Green, my gosh. So I have to, every other day I probably wish, man, I'd love to be John Green. So.
The book I most wish I had written is the one that's on deadline and due, and that's the one I most wish that I had written. But recently I read a book called Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and I was really just taken with it as the writer who found all these vintage photographs, and he used those as sort of a springboard to start a story. And it's kind of a creepy time travel, paranormal, There's some love interest, so we know that's important. But it's just a very different book, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Amazing cover. I love that. It's a great cover.
You want to okay, so another question. I saw that hand go up back there, Maddie.
If you had to give one piece of advice to young authors, what would it be? For any author?
Okay, I'll start with that. I like the advice that I heard. I saw Marcus Zusak, who's another, like, if that would be another book, The Book Thief, if I could have written that book. And my friend Lisa would ask authors, or, you know, what's your advice in 5 words or less? And his advice was, don't be afraid to fail. And I like that, and my advice sort of goes along with that. I always say, don't be afraid to get in there and play. You don't know what you're good at until you try. And I think sometimes writers are really worried that what they have in their head isn't going to sound as good on paper. And I really think what he was trying to say is, you don't know until you try, and it's okay to try and have it not be very good, and maybe the next one will be better. I mean, I wrote 3 novels that never went anywhere before I finally wrote one that was publishable. So I just like that advice. Don't, you know, try it and see what happens and play and have fun. That's what I would say.
Do you have any?
I do, yeah. So my biggest piece of advice, I guess, is after you've written something, I learned this from my agent, to walk away from it for a while and not pay attention to it and then read it with a truly fresh eye, because I think, at least for me as a new author, I mean, my tendency was to, you know, finish the book and leap back from my computer and throw up my hands and say, I'm all done, everyone read it, but that's not necessarily the greatest book, and I found that when I write something and then leave it for a few months, it's definitely a lot better, or I can identify the places I need to fix a lot easier once I walk away.
My comment kind of goes along with Lisa's. I always tell everyone, just keep writing, because my first book published was The Naughty List, and that was the 5th book that I wrote. And this one, I think, is my 13th book. So I just kept writing, and some of my books make it into my other books. Like I always say, I vampire off my other books, and I take pieces of it and put it in my other books. So I think it's really just about continuing to write, and sometimes your ideas develop into other ideas that maybe were a little bit better.
And I think one of the things that most writers have in common, and I don't say all writers because there are a few and like a handful, just a small handful of people that write their first book, send it off to an agent, and it goes to auction and it sells like that. It doesn't happen all the time. Most of us toil and toil.
We hate those people.
It's not a secret. But the rest of us, I would say, have stacks, and maybe some of you guys don't save them, but I have stacks of rejection letters. It's that the rest of us hang in there and keep going. You want it so bad you just keep throwing stuff out there. not garbage, but you know, you keep working at it and you keep trying and you just don't give up. It's that not giving up because you want it. And so, you know, it's so subjective. I mean, you can get 100 rejection letters, but it just takes that one person, you know, to see what you're trying to do. I mean, you still keep working on it while you're doing that. But one of my friends, I have a writer friend who said she got rejection after, she got some rejections, then her book sold, and the week that her book made the New York Times her debut made the New York Times bestseller list, she got a rejection letter from an agent that said, no one's ever going to buy a book about fairies. This kind of book about fairies. And so it just shows how subjective it is. I mean, you really can't take it to heart. If you see a pattern, you look at it, but just you hang in there and don't give up.
I would say my #1 writing rule is give yourself permission to write crap. Crap can be fixed. My first drafts, I'm working on writing right now, it's due September 1st. And I do this thing where I leave myself asterisks so I can find them later. And one of them, I haven't even chosen a name for this character. I literally would just write evil boy name every time I get there so I can plug it in later. But it just makes me feel so much better to get through the first draft and then go back and fix it, because I think a lot of people think it needs to be good and that they get stuck because they don't think they're there yet. I just sit down and I write whatever the heck comes out, and then when I get to the end, then I can fix it. So if you do get writer's block, it's okay if you're like spending 2 pages writing about the weather or something if it gets going.
So I have 2 pieces of advice. The first one is to read a lot. Books really are the best teacher. And the second is a piece of advice that I got from a writer, Ivan Coyote, who's in Canada. She's a great writer. And I was talking with her, and I was in the process of writing, it was my 3rd book at the time, and I said, well, I'm just, I'm so afraid, like, what if I send it out there and nobody likes it and it gets rejected? And she gave me the best writing advice ever. She sat me down, she says, Eileen, I hate to tell you this. You're already not published. The worst thing that's going to happen is you still won't be published. And the odds that somebody from Simon & Schuster is going to break down in front of your house, knock on the door and say, do you happen to have anything I could read while I wait for the tow truck, is slim. So you've got to do it. And for me, it was that strange realization that you really don't have anything to lose. There are already stories on your computer. If you send them out and they get rejected, that's part of it. That means the rest of us won't hate you, so that's good. And then you can just keep going from there.
Okay,
oh, questions?
Yeah, I know that Kimberly and Suzanne have sequels to their books, or Kimberly has more than one. You have at least one. But like, I know with contemporary novels, it's harder to do sequels, but are you thinking about, like, would you ever think about doing a sequel to one of your books?
I have the microphone. I always think about it, but for right now, mine are all standalone books. They're a one-story kind of thing. It's an easy answer.
Mine are all standalone too, but I would like to do another one of these. It just depends on how well it does, so buy it so I can write it.
Yeah, same for me. I've had some people say they would love to see, because obviously there's only 24 hours and then what? But it's not always up to us. The publisher has the final say, and they have to have a good reason to do a second book. And sequels are hard. You don't want to do one. At least I don't. I would rather not do one than do one where people are, they're disappointed. I don't want to disappoint anyone. So I don't know. I think about it, and I haven't found a plot yet. But there's a part of me that really would like to revisit those characters. So we'll see. My middle grade, they're companion books, which is really fun. So the difference, for those of you who don't know, a sequel is same characters, story continues on. What we are seeing more and more, especially in middle grade, is companions. So you take a character, oftentimes, or something that happened in the first book, and it sort of gets its own story. Usually a character gets its own story, and there are characters from the first book that you get to revisit, but there's usually a totally new plot, new things happening. So that's kind of fun, I think, because you still get to have some of the characters, but you get to know new characters more. And anyway, so I think companions are actually really fun.
Sure. You know the answer.
Yes.
You know my answer. Everyone has asked me if I was going to write a sequel to Forgotten. I think 99.9% of the emails I get ask that, and because it's not tied up with the bow, and I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to leave you hopeful and also able to use your imagination a little bit. So I'm not planning on it right now, but I'm not opposed to sequels either.
Yeah. My first series is contemporary that had a sequel, and it's kind of funny because all of my books were written as standalones, and then my publisher decided to make them a series. So Need So Beautiful was just one book, and then they decided that they needed a second one, and the book that I just sold, The Program, was written as a really long standalone, and they decided that I have to write another 100,000 words to go with it, which I'm super excited about. But I did have a sequel to The Naughty List, which was So Many Boys. But that was contemporary.
I don't know if my answer is easy. I have The Body Finder is a series, and The Pledge is not announced yet. So.